In this video, I'm going to share with you guys something that could be considered extremely controversial. I'll tell you guys why everything is harder for this generation. I've showed this chart before. I'll bring this chart up again. So this is Canada's fertility rate. Back in 1960, the average Canadian couple had 3.8 children per woman. Then back in 1960, both USA and Canada legalized birth control, and it's made available to be free for all Canadian and American women to use. Ever since then, the fertility rate completely collapsed. In 2023, Canada's fertility rate is only at 1.33 children per woman. That's with immigrants and refugees bringing up this number. And obviously, there are many contributing factors to this, but the consequences will be severe. You see, back in 1960, for every single Canadian that is retired, that is collecting pension, there was 7 people that's working and paying taxes. That's where you get your contributions towards your old age security and your Canada pension plan. However, in 2024, this is despite the fact that Canada is bringing millions and millions of immigrants. Most of these immigrants are young working age people. But today, the ratio is still only at 2.4 to 1. For every single 1 Canadian retired, there's only 2.4 people working. So where do Canadians get their pension and the old age security then? So when you get old in Canada, most Canadians retire at the age of 65. So when you get to 65, there are 2 forms of payments. You have the Canada Pension Plan, which every single paycheck earned throughout your lifetime. Unless you're working at a cash job, every single job you worked in Canada that requires a SIM card, that requires you to sign a legal contract. So for those jobs, every single paycheck, you get your Canada Pension Plan deducted every single paycheck, and you get to collect your Canada Pension Plan when you turn 65. And believe it or not, even if you have worked your entire life in Canada, okay, when you get to the age of 65, when you retire, there's not that much money in the Canada Pension Plan. I believe right now the Canadian average is only around $774 a month, which is very little. But obviously there's a supplementary payment. This is your old age security. So the old age security, every single Canadian citizen gets to collect the old age security when you get to 65. And the longer you lived in Canada, the more you can collect. So in order to qualify for the old age security, after you turn the age of 18, you have to live in Canada for a minimum of 10 years. Then the payment goes up. You know, if you've lived in Canada for longer than 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, this is on top of your Canada pension plan. So the 2 added together, you get roughly anywhere between $2,200 to $2,300 a month Canadian. It's really not that much money. That's about the same as working a minimum wage job at McDonald's, working 40 hours a week. You'll end up with the same amount of money. No, it is extremely depressing. You know, you put your entire life into one career, one profession for over 40 years, and all you end up with at the age of 65 is a minimum wage paycheck. There are major caveats to this. So your Canada Pension Plan, the amount of money you put into your Canada Pension Plan, the government has their own calculator that is usually based on life expectancy. Let's say if you were to collect your pension plan at the age of 65, usually by the time you reach the age of 80, that's when you and the government breaks even. So the pensions you collect from 65 to 80, that's all the payments you made. That's all the payments that has been deducted from every single one of your paycheck. However, the longer you live, the more beneficial it is to you, and the more detrimental it is to the Canadian government. Because after you turn 80, the government has to come up with extra money to pay your Canada pension plan because you have not contributed that much money during your 40 years of working in Canada. And the old age security that's being paid to you, that is even more detrimental to the Canadian government. You see, because none of your deductions from your previous paychecks ever goes to contributing to your old age security. All of that money from the old age security, it comes from young, hardworking Canadians. That is the only way Canada can come up with this money. And you see, this is a problem as Canada is getting older and older and older. That's why Canada is so desperate to bring in millions of immigrants and refugees, because they need more people to be working. They need more people to be paying taxes. Because what's going to happen is that Canada eventually has to reach the point where they have to default the old age security for many seniors. Because with more and more people retired and less people working and paying taxes, the budget is not going to be able to balance itself. So thanks to our healthcare and the technological advances in recent years, it's expected that these post-pandemic babies will have an average life expectancy of over 100 years old. Well, you think, oh, that's good, right? People are going to get to live to over 100. Well, this is terrible, terrible news for the government, because this means that these people will be able to collect their pension and old age security for 35 years. Where's that money going to come from? Right now, for every single person that's retired in Canada, there's only 2.4 people working. Back in 1960, it was 7 to 1. And you have to remember, Canada's fertility rate peaked at 3.8 children per woman back in 1960. So people born in 1960, how old are they now? They're 64. So the vast majority of these people, they're about to retire within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. There's going to be a massive increase in the percentage of seniors and the percentage of pensioners. This is a massive issue because Canada has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world. So what has Canada been doing in order to cope? How has Canada been balancing the budget? Well, Canada is not balancing the budget. Do you guys know how much Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, do you guys know how much they have spent since the start of the pandemic? The government of Canada has printed over $700 billion Canadian. That is over $500 billion US. Because there's simply no way to balance the budget because every single year there are more people retiring in Canada and there are fewer people entering the workforce. But when you print money out of thin air, there's going to be severe consequences. Just over the course of the last 4 years, Canada's national debt ballooned by 40%, while Canada's GDP in the past 4 years only grew by 4%. And this is obviously due to the setbacks during the lockdowns for 2 years between 2020 to 2022. So what does this mean? Let's take a very simple example. So let's say in a country's economy, you have $100 in circulation. And at the same time, in your country's economy, let's say all of your GDP comes from watermelons. So if there are $100 in circulation and there are 20 watermelons, each watermelon will cost $5. So what happens when the Trudeau government comes in and prints us $700 billion in order to balance the budget over the course of 4 years? The money supply in the economy has doubled. So now there are $200 in circulation. However, Canada's GDP never changed. It only grew by 4% in 4 years. That's 1% per year. So there are still only 20 watermelons in the economy. So now each watermelon will cost you $10. So the price of goods and commodities have doubled literally within just a few years. That is the severe consequences of what happens when the government is printing money rampantly in order to balance the budget. And this deficit is not going to decrease. It is only going to increase and increase and increase over the next few decades because Canada's population will keep getting older and older and older. And this will put a tremendous stress on our healthcare system as well because I have no idea how the hell they will be able to cope with this. Because right now, if you live in Ottawa, the average wait time at Ottawa Hospital is 9 hours. I'm not even making this up. Every single department and every single hospital, I would say it's not even just Ottawa, in every single Canadian hospital, they're on the verge of breaking because there are so many old people now. And obviously, when you get old, it's just like, when a car gets old, it's going to break down. You will have to visit the hospital a lot more often in order to get the regular checkups done. And even though Canada has universal healthcare, that money has to come from somewhere. Where does that money come from? It's going to come from young people who are working, who are paying taxes. All of the pressure is going to fall onto the younger generation. And countries like Canada and the United States, they can't just keep doing this forever. They can't just keep on printing money. Just look at what's happening in the US. Eventually, you will hit a debt ceiling. You will completely crash, just like what happened to Zimbabwe, just like what happened to Argentina, just like what happened to Ecuador. And if the USA, the country with the #1 GDP in the world, if they were to default their debt, the entire world's economy would come crashing down literally within hours. So as the number of seniors grow in all of these Western countries, because this is not just a Canadian issue, it's not just an American issue. Same things happening in the UK, in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Germany. Every single Western country is facing a rapid aging population crisis. Especially as these boomers, the people who were born post-World War II, from 1945 on into the 50s, into the 60s. So within the next 10, 20, 30 years, there's going to be tens of millions of people who are retiring, who will no longer be paying taxes and contributing to the country's GDP. They will only be taking money away from people who are working. So eventually, the government is going to reach a critical point where they will be forced to make a decision. And this is going to get extremely dark. Either you stop overtaxing the hardworking young people, or you keep taxing the shit out of young people so you can come up with the Canada pension plan and the old age security so you can keep giving this money to these old people so they can keep on living. There's no easy solution to this problem, because if you overtax a hardworking 30-year-old couple, that means that you have completely destroyed their chances at future, because the best they can afford, even with 2 incomes, is to rent a tiny little studio apartment. They will never ever be able to own a home, because they will never ever be able to save up the money for a down payment. They will never ever raise children, because who is going to want to raise 2 or 3 children in a tiny studio apartment? And also when both partners have to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week just to pay the bills, right? But if you ease the burden on the younger generation by giving these younger people a tax break so they can have more money in their pockets, so they can possibly save up enough money one day to own a home in Canada and possibly finally starting a family and finally raise children, this means that that money has to come from cutting the Canada pension plan and cutting the old age security from the old people. Imagine if you're an 80-year-old sitting in a wheelchair and you're in the early stages of dementia, and one day you get a mail from the Canada's Revenues Agency. They're saying that we're forced to make the difficult decision in order to balance a budget because the government has hit a debt ceiling and we can no longer afford to keep overtaxing the young people because they're the ones who are going to keep our economy running. So we're going to have to sacrifice people like you. Imagine an 80-year-old that's sitting in a wheelchair that has Parkinson's, has dementia, and you cut this guy's old age security and his Canada pension plan. That is going to be a death sentence. Those are the only 2 solutions. This is extremely, extremely dark. This is why so many people have brought up the topic of the population collapse. The number one issue is not actually when the population goes up. The number one issue is when the population starts to go down. And at Canada's current projections, by 2100, the average age of a Canadian citizen will be roughly 57 years old. That means that anywhere between 35 to 40% of Canadian citizens will be retired by then. You will have more people that's retired versus people that's actually in the workforce. And there's no way to balance the budget. Either you sacrifice the younger generation, well, even that will completely lead a country to its doom. Because if you destroy the younger generation, then that country has no future. Or you sacrifice the older generation. You take away their Canada pension plan and you take away their old age security and you take away universal health care, so you have more money to focus on the youths, so you can finally balance the budget without excessively printing money. And that's going to be a death sentence for all of the seniors who are about to lose their pension and old age security. This is why throughout human history, every civilization that has had a fertility rate of below 2 children per woman, every single one of them has all perished. This is what happens when we have a society with too many old people, because the system will completely collapse due to the burdens that's placed on the younger generation from the elders. You guys want to know what they used to do way back in the day in Scandinavia? They used to push old people off of the top of cliffs. No, I'm serious. You can actually look this up. It wasn't just the Scandinavians. The Romans, the Greeks, the French, and the Spanish, they all did something very, very similar. There will be some kind of annual tradition. There will be some kind of a ritual where all of the elders will be sacrificed. Because what's going to happen, when the economy runs into a recession, when there's a famine, when people can't afford to eat, and you look at the old people, you say, well, there's meat right there. Who is more valuable to the country's future? Is it going to be a 20-year-old young man or a 70-year-old grandpa? Obviously, the logical choice is to kill the 70-year-old. And when there's not enough food to go around, everybody gets a piece of the 70-year-old. We are already seeing the beginning stages of this in Canada. You guys ever heard of the program MAD? M-A-D. Medically Assisted Death. This is mostly for older people in Canada. The government is saying that if you're at a point where you're chronically ill, where you're drowning in debt and you're overworked and you have severe depression, you have completely reached a dead end in life. You have reached a point of no return, and you have no family, no friends, no counseling, nobody to help you. You're living alone and in a constant state of depression. But if you don't have the courage to kill yourself, the government now has this plan officially in place. I'm serious. You can look up this on the news. Some older Canadians are choosing this option of MAD, of medically assisted death, because some older Canadians who are, let's say, divorced or widowed, or have lived their entire life in loneliness and misery. They have no friends, no family. They're forced to work 60 or 70 hours just to break even, just to be able to pay the bills, just so they can continue to live in a tiny studio apartment. Some of these older Canadians are saying that, give me that lethal injection and just end it. I think this option is going to be increasingly more popular as Canada is faced with this ultimate demographics dilemma as the country keeps getting older and older and older, and the economy is not looking great for the future. There will be so many broke seniors in the future, and the people with absolute no hope. The government will come in and they will tell you that, if you don't have the courage to do it, we'll give you an injection and everything is going to end within seconds. This is how far we have fallen as a human civilization. Because think about everything that happens in nature. You'll never see an animal that will kill themselves. But unfortunately, this will become the inevitable for the future of humanity because with the collapsing birth rate, there will be so many old people. When there are fewer and fewer people working and more people retired, there's going to be no way to balance the budget in the future. Eventually, in one way or another, the government will be forced to find a way to get rid of the old people. I'm sorry if this video got extremely dark, but that is the inevitable truth.